In this video, I'm going to show you two of my Zwift races and they have two things in common. First, in each of them I recorded my best cycling performance so far. And second, they both took place last week. Yes, I'm now in the best cycling shape of my life, and in this video I'm going to tell you what changes I did to achieve that. And those two races were stages 4 and 5 of this year's SISU Tour, a stage race in which I am competing for the title of the best A category sprinter. After stage 3 I was on 16th spot and my goal this week was to improve it. And stage 4 brought an excellent opportunity to do just that. The route was Hell of the North, a relatively flat route with two caveats, a petit KOM at the end, and what was more important for me, a start through the intestines. And you might be wondering, why was that more important for me? Well, the intestines in this direction is a slightly uphill rolling passage with a lot of curves that you need to survive in order to even reach the sprint. And when you are racing in your own category, that's not an issue. But when you are doing a mixed category race in which there are 24 A+ riders, such start can drop you sooner than you even get into the rhythm. And I was sort of afraid of that. And the fear wasn't completely unwarranted. The pace was very heavy, exactly as expected, and you can see that at the end of the intestines, about 95% of my effort was in zone 4, 5 or 6. But I survived this first hard part. But the second one wasn't that far off, and what's more, the effort didn't ease up after the intestines, which meant that when we arrived at the first sprint, which was the longest cobbled uphill sprint, just this time in a reverse, my heart rate was still deep into 170s. But ultimately, it didn't matter. This was time for me to perform. No one would care about excuses about hard lead-in to those sprints. The only thing that mattered was the time between the sprint start and the sprint finish. At the beginning of the segment, the group barely increased the effort, which I liked, because on sprint this long, the best strategy is to sit in the draft anyway, at least for the most part of it. But then we've had a strong attack from the front and basically all hell broke loose. The whole group sped up. I tried to sit in with them at about 5 watts per kilo. There were about 4 guys now who broke from the front and there was no chance for me to go with them, but I really focused on going at least with the chasers. And I think that was a correct strategy. I lost about 5 seconds to the top 2, but I was still in contact with the group afterwards. I immediately popped the draft power-up that I just got because I desperately needed to recover, but internally I was pretty happy about where I was at that point. After the first sprint we've had a pretty long recovery before the next 3. Well, recovery might be quite a strong word, as you can see my heart rate is still over 170 and there's plenty of red on my power chart, but even though it was uncomfortable, it was doable uncomfortable, if you know what I mean. And somewhere around this point I started believing that I could actually make it with the top guys through all 4 sprints. The terrain was now easier, but as usual there was the question mark in the shape of the 2 back-to-back sprints. And on the first one I didn't do terribly. I sat comfortably in the draft and then increased the power before the banner. Not the best sprint by any means, but not a failure either. Once again I got the draft, and this one probably saved me because I was just barely hanging onto the group even with power around 300 watts and the draft power up active. On the next segment it wasn't a sprint really. I was just sitting in the draft doing as much power as possible and it was just about enough to not get dropped. But still, even such effort matters when you are able to do it in the draft of the fastest guys in the race. One more lucky moment with a draft power up and now I've had about 3 minutes to rest enough in order to be able to give it my all during the last sprint segment. And I didn't really rest. My heart rate now permanently hovered around 180, but I knew that the last sprint marked the factual end of the race for me and that I could ride easy afterwards. And I'm happy to say that I've done this last one about as perfectly as possible. I stayed in the draft right until the start of the segment and then just hammered it. Only one other rider arrived faster. After that it was just an easy recovery for me until the finish line. In terms of the result, not only I've done fairly well in the sprints, but I've also recorded my all-time high power, 295 watts for over 20 minutes, which equals 4.04 watts per kilo. After this race, my position in the sprint classification improved to 11th place, so big success for me, and I'm going to talk later in this video about the things I've changed recently. But few days later, just another beast was awaiting me, the climbiest stage of this year's SISU Tour, Ven 10. 11 kilometers and over 700 vertical meters. And if you are following this channel, you know I'm not a climber. But lately I've actually improved in this area a lot too. In the last few months I've managed to lose over 6 kilos without it impacting the watts I can produce, and that was a big boost to my climbing performance. I expected this race to take about 45 minutes and my power duration model predicted I should be able to hold in the ballpark of 265 watts, so I set that as my initial target, even though I thought that was ambitious because the day before I've done a killer interval workout. But if I was able to keep this power without blowing up, I would be very happy. And it started great. I went a little faster off the gate because I wanted to stay in the draft on the flatter early sections of the climb, but very quickly settled into the target power range. And fairly quickly I got familiar impression. This is not pleasant, but I can probably do it. The first 2 out of the 5 2-kilometer sectors were pretty good. I actually went above the target for them. The third one was where I actually had to start exercising my mental toughness a little. I was still very close to those 265 watts, but many times I felt tempted to just ever so slightly ease up on the power. But I was live streaming this event, and that is the issue with live streaming. You cannot hide your moment of weakness. You have people watching you, encouraging you, and you can either push through the pain or disappoint them. And I didn't want to do that, so I quickly returned to my original power. On the 4th sector I got my rhythm back under the control, and my heart rate actually even got below 170 here despite staying on my power target. It was actually my legs that would give up first, not my aerobic capacity. Last 2 kilometers to go and I was holding the 265 watts basically until I was able to see the finish line on the minimap, and I saw 4 riders in front of me I could potentially overtake. So I ramped up the power and went for them one by one. I finished in 43 minutes, and for the second time in 1 week I recorded my power personal best. Not only in watts per kilo but even in raw watts. My average power for this duration was 271 watts, 6 watts than I set myself as the target, which equaled to 3.71 watts per kilo. So what caused this improvement? Well, I already talked about the first one, my weight loss. In 2 months since May I lost 6 kilos by counting calories, and it is important to say it didn't have negative impact on my power output, which is the important part. This helped me on climbs, but it helps even for staying with the group on rolling terrain. Secondly, I've exercised a pretty ruthless discipline and adherence to my training plan. As you may know, I use Xert as my training platform of choice, but ultimately it does not matter much what training program are you using, it matters if you stick to it. Do all the intervals, finish every single cooldown, power through every boring weekend long ride. My training low right now is at all-time high, and that's what it often is, just riding more. Thirdly, since we are talking about training, I want to talk about one specific type of workout that I do weekly now. And it is hard interval session with moderate power as a recovery. The purpose of this workout is to teach my body to rest and recover even at a moderate power like in zone 3. And that massively helps in races where the pace quickly goes between really hard and moderate, but very rarely goes completely easy. Number 4, I started doing proper warm-ups before the hard efforts. That is a thing that is often neglected and sometimes even feels counterproductive, but it's not. I've been using the Bradley Wiggins warm-up protocol that's available on ZWIFT, and although it feels almost unnecessarily hard, I've never had that feeling when I'm catching for breath at the start of the race ever since. And finally, the mental training, and this is a big one. Ultimately, sometimes the difference between success and failure in your race is not tied to your fitness. It is tied to whether or not you will give in to the devil that sits on your shoulder and whispers to your ear that you can get rid of all the pain if you slow down. I've been reading a lot of books on this topic lately, and my favorite one is Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. If you haven't read that one, it's really worth it, I promise. So that was week 3 of the SISU Tour. There are 2 more stages remaining. In the meantime, watch the video from previous week, you can find it right here.